Pretty horrifying. So while we were there, of course, we wanted to get into Gaza, considering the US is sponsoring not only this brutal occupation, but this medieval siege to the tune of 10 million US tax dollars every single day. So we wanted to get into this place and expose, of course, what you just saw in this film. We had all the official paperwork, we had all the proper credentials. The Israeli press office denied us, they banned us, on the premise that we were propagandists, not journalists, and that I was an Iranian agent. Because I'm used to being called a Russian agent, so that just came out of the blue. It was also really scary to be called that from the Israeli government. So about a year and a half later, of course, the Great March of Return sparked off. I was completely shocked. I guess not shocked, is that we know how the corporate media operates. We know that it doesn't matter what Palestinians do or how peacefully they protest. As Ahmed Abu Artema, the lead organizer, said in one interview, he said that, people always say, where's the Palestinian Gandhi? And he said there's been 200 of them, and they've all been killed. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what they do, the corporate media is going to paint them in the same way. I think it was the time that after 60 people were ruthlessly gunned down in cold blood, and you saw Barry Weiss having the audacity to say, they planned this, right? They planned their own massacre. And the front page of the New York Times, the day after this horrific atrocity took place, actually said, Israelis reflect, I hope that every bullet was justified, after 60 people were murdered by Israeli snipers. So I was so blown away. Gaza journalists asked me to Skype into a session and kind of depict what the Western media coverage was, because they really thought that it would be different. Again, this is unlike anything that they've ever done and mobilized for. And so after I told them, no, it's exactly the same. In fact, it's just the passive voice, Palestinians died, there's clashes, right? Well, people are being killed. Who's killing them? They don't just drop dead. We kind of worked together with them. First, we were just going to do an Empire Files episode of The Great March, because I said, look, we want to do this story justice, we want to amplify these voices because no one else is really doing it correctly. And it would just kind of get these spattering of headlines and then just forgotten about, right? And so we directed all the footage, we directed all the interviews, and when we saw the footage, as you just saw, how could we not do this? How could we not take the year off and make a film like this? I mean, we had to do the story justice in the way that you just saw. It was absolutely mind-blowing what Muaz Maza and Asma Tia Hamad did every Friday, risking their lives. The courage is really profound, getting that footage. So long story short, that's how it came together. Two other quick comments is we had to redact our co-producer's name, who I was on the phone with every day for the year that it took to make this film, because he didn't want to be retaliated against from Israel. He said that if he put his name to this film, they might not ever let him leave. And I think that really speaks to the stakes of what we're dealing with here and what they deal with. The fact that he deserves the accolades, he deserves to be here, and he can't even put his name to the film. After Razan was brutally murdered, the New York Times, as you saw, had interviewed her a week prior to her murder, highlighting her heroism. Of course, after her murder, they did this follow-up kind of true crime investigation. How did Razan get killed? Looking through cell phone footage and whatnot, and they interviewed Rasha, they interviewed Rami, they interviewed her mother, Sabrine, for about 30 seconds to a minute. And then they let an Israeli general have the floor for about 5 minutes, explaining that it was okay. It was just an accident. But as you saw, the Israeli authorities released a propaganda video saying that she was a human shield for Hamas. So we worked with Sabrine, actually, and who was understandably very, very hesitant to actually do this interview, did not trust us at all. Why would she? Why would she trust American journalists to retell the story of what happened to Razan and who Razan was? And so we made a pact with her that she could see the documentary first, before anyone else. And luckily she really, really loved it. And so that's who saw the documentary, and that's why we wanted to do a proper tribute to Razan, and we wanted to give a proper homage to how heroic and wonderful her life was. So that's how it came together, and that's why we did that.
Do you mind speaking a little bit more about the film crew in Gaza? How you got connected with the people who did all of the videography?
Yeah, so a team of Gaza journalists from the Council on International Relations have reached out to me to do this Skype session to kind of talk about Western media coverage and just talk about media coverage in general about the Great March. And that's how it kind of all arose out of that conversation. So it's about 20 Gazan journalists who we just were having a conversation, and we just kept in touch. And through that meeting, I just said, look, I want to do an Empire Files episode about this, or a series of episodes about this. And who ended up, actually, my main contact there ended up being the producer, who we had to redact his name. He does incredible work. He was field producing everything, and he's the one who set us up with the incredible videographers that you saw that were highlighted, Wazmaz and Azmat Tiamat. And when we found out that we were working with a woman, that was another incredible thing, I think, taking away the strength and resilience of women in Gaza, who you simply do not hear from ever. And the fact that one of the main videographers was a woman, putting herself out there in the march, risking her life, which really just kind of thoroughly debunks this propaganda we hear about the march, where it's masked men, militants, and or using civilians as human shields. I mean, it's Palestinians of all stripes, led by women, contingents of women leading these people. So it really was incredible to see that and to be able to work with her directly to do this.
Thank you. The next question's for you, Mike. What went into deciding how to structure the film with all the different sections? Thinking a lot about the UN report.
Yeah, well, there's no shortage of documentaries about Gaza, which is a good thing in general, because humanizing anything that humanizes the most dehumanized people on the planet is important. Of course, there's a lot of documentaries about Gaza that are not good politically, but we wanted to do something that different, something that stood out, something that wasn't meant to just be a film where you feel sympathy or you feel that something is beautiful or whatever, and then that's it. Which is the same reason we're doing this tour with activist organizations around the country. We could have just done this tour as Empire Files and just made it about that. But every single city we're going to and have been to, we're partnering with local activists, anti-war, Palestine solidarity organizations, because we want this film to be more than just something that makes you feel bad, but something that can actually be used as a tool by activists, by movements, by organizations. And so to make it a tool, we wanted to go beyond just the cinematic aspect of it. And so I think the instinct of a filmmaker would be to make the climax the march and the drama at the march, and then that be the end of the film. But we put that in the middle and had it bookended by personal stories that had all of this information in between, historical context that you never hear, the broad view of the UN report. And the reason we focused on the UN report specifically is because again, because we want this to be a tool. Now, we know the United Nations is limited, does a lot of bad things, makes a lot of bad decisions, is powerless in many ways because of the US. But we wanted to show clearly, our first task with this film was to, not so much to make a film, but to produce a piece of journalism that proved, that did an investigation, that got exclusive corroborating evidence through interviews, through personal stories, through exclusive video evidence, that proved, without a doubt, that Israel is committing war crimes. And the reason we framed it within the context of the UN is because the UN is recognized in the world as, I guess, the body that upholds international law. And that even within the confines of this, the system of the UN, which is limited, even within those limited confines, what the Palestinian people are doing, everything they're doing is 100% legal, justified, and legitimate. And everything the Israelis are doing is 100% illegal and criminal. I mean, even everything down to the bullets and the weapons. I mean, they could just be shooting people with regular bullets. It would be one thing if they were killing unarmed civilians with regular bullets. That's a war crime. But they're only loading exploding bullets in their weapons. I mean, it's just war crimes upon war crimes upon war crimes. So we wanted to make that clear-cut case so everyone here can kind of arm themselves with the actual facts that can't be disputed in any kind of argument or discussion with other organizations and the activist movement and things like that. But we didn't want to do just that, of course, because while that's important, the broad view of the war crimes and the actual journalistic investigation, we wanted to put faces to all those statistics. That's why we begin and end with personal stories of families, what it's like to live in Gaza, what loss is like in Gaza. Of course, we focused on Razan in particular because we wanted to retell the story of her death, because before this, you looked up her death and it was just like this slanderous story that the Israeli snipers accidentally killed her while they were like trying to kill a militant or something like that. It's absolutely false. Targeted, shot her directly after threatening to shoot her many times. And we wanted to close it and end with a story as we began with a story, because as the broad view of statistics are important, right? Over 200 people now have been killed at the march. There was one killed last Friday, there will be more killed on this coming Friday. And we could have chosen any one of those victims, any one of the 200 plus victims, and shown you a story, a family just like Razan's family, and an indictment for war crimes just as compelling as the investigation into Razan's death. Because they're all the same. They're all unarmed. They're all not engaging in violence. They're all doing nothing. Sometimes they're doing something like providing medical aid or taking a photograph. And so we wanted to put faces and to the statistics, put families to the statistics, because it's something you need to remember when you're talking about justice in a broad view. I mean, even seeing Sabrina in the end, saying, I want justice. Like, we don't want sympathy, we want our rights. And so I think there's the larger important cause for Palestinian liberation and Palestinian rights, which is we're all engaged, but then there's so many individuals that just want justice personally for their loved ones who have been killed. And so we wanted to give credence to those individual heartfelt family demands in addition to kind of the broad struggle for national liberation.
Thank you. Last question is for both of you. So as you tour the country with this film, what's the impact that you're seeing it have, and what are the biggest takeaways for you both?
I guess I'm surprised. I mean, I know that the political consciousness is completely shifting. I thought that marquees up in semi-conservative cities saying Gaza Fights For Freedom would kind of cause more of a backlash and get a lot more trolling, let's say. And surprisingly, we have not gotten any people complaining, no one trying to disrupt. I mean, I think that speaks volumes to where we are at with the consciousness on this issue. People are waking up, they are accepting Gaza, they are accepting Palestinian liberation, they are understanding that you cannot be progressive, you cannot call yourself liberal if you condone what is going on. This is a criminal, rogue, apartheid state that is besieging millions of people in an open-air prison. You are not a progressive if you support that. So I think it's becoming embarrassing, and people are embarrassed to actually come out and now do what they maybe felt comfortable doing a couple of years ago. So I think that's the biggest takeaway for me with the tour so far, is seeing the incredible outpouring of support from all organizations and just average citizens ready to hear it, finally, right? Palestinians have been waiting 70 years for Americans to wake up and mobilize for their rights, because again, this is stemming from our government sponsoring this on a daily basis. I think the biggest takeaway from the film, making the film, of course, dozens of hours watching this march footage and seeing no militants, nothing that can be construed whatsoever as a weapon. A rock is not a weapon, let's get that straight. A fence is not a border. We need to stop, we need to actually start acknowledging that these are misnomers and acknowledge reality for what it is. But I think just understanding and really comprehending what courage really means. As an American, I'm very privileged. I use my privilege to expose my own government's war crimes on a daily basis, but I think it's hard for us to understand people who will sacrifice themselves in the way that Palestinians have, to go to a fence knowing the risks, right? I always thought that courage was having no fear and doing things fearlessly. And now I understand that it's actually being terrified, scared for your life, just like Razan was. She told her colleague, do we have to go to the fence? Do we have to go again today? And she said, we will if we have to. And Razan said, okay. And they did. And they did over and over again to save lives. And that's courage, is knowing that you could die and still going and being terrified, just like everyone who goes to the fence every Friday, knowing that they could die, just standing there, holding a flag. What about the people throwing rocks? That's a death sentence. And they still do it. They still do it, not because they're hopeless, but because they have hope that things will change. They're optimistic that justice will come. As Ahmed said, he said, we know, we are waiting for the day that justice will come, just like it has come for other oppressed peoples in the world. Even though we are weaker, we will continue the struggle until we win. And that is courage.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Mike.
Well, I mean, there was a lot to think about making this film because it took us quite a long time to make this. We spent about a year on it. I think the last 5 or 6 months were spent doing like 15-hour days in an office. Me, Abby, our composer John Prysner, who goes by the name Anahedron for his music, and our editor Taylor Gill. It was, in addition to our team in Gaza, I mean, when it came to the post-production, it was like 4 of us watching this stuff over and over again. We had about 6 hours of protest footage from the march. And so we had to spend quite a bit of time going through all of that protest footage and whittling it down to the experience that you were a part of. And so we got up close and personal and whatever as much as we could through the footage with everyone there. I mean, I think there is. I would encourage people to watch it again with better sound. We apologize for the bad speaker system. It sounds much better in your headphones or on a TV or a real surround sound. Because there's so many kind of little things that watching it, even every time I watch it, and we watch it every screening. We watched it about 100 times before we could hit export on it. But then all these screenings you watch again, and every time there's just such subtle little things that I notice that impact me. When the first scene starts in the Great March, where there's the first real explosion, and you see the girl being carried away, who's obviously like unconscious, her eyes are open. But you can see her like as she's being carried away, she's limp, but she's like putting her finger up to be like, I'm still alive, I'm still here. So that's like the past few times has got me just like focusing in on that. But I think the biggest takeaway in a lot of ways too was, we investigated the Israeli side. This isn't a biased documentary. We show both sides. We show exactly what the Israeli explanation is for doing all these things. And that's what you saw. That news montage was the only explanation they have for killing. Most of the people aren't even killed throwing rocks. Most of the people, which is still a war crime, you can't do that. Most of the people aren't killed breaking through, cutting a piece of wire. The vast majority are killed just standing there, as you saw, smoking a cigarette, talking on a cell phone, waving a flag, walking away from the fence, and things like that. Their only defense is they are, one, actively engaged in violence. Well, we know that's true. Everyone's just sitting there, hanging out, partying, dancing. And number two, that they're human shields. Well, what does human shield mean? Human shield means there's an armed combatant that's engaging you with a weapon, and they're hiding behind a civilian so that you can't shoot back at them without killing the civilian. There hasn't been one gun, not one round fired, not one rocket fired, not one explosive used at the Great March Return by demonstrators, by militants, in proximity of demonstrations, anything. So this idea of human shield is completely broken. But they can't say anything else. I mean, this is a billion-dollar propaganda operation that Israel has, and they can't come up with anything else except that. And so my takeaway is that they are on such loose foot, even though they have complete immunity in international courts because of the U.S. veto power. Of course, no accountability from within Israeli society or within the U.S. Government. That they're on such loose footing that they're so desperate looking. I mean, they can't come up with anything else, even with this well-oiled propaganda machine. It just shows that I feel like they're on their clock is ticking on how much longer they can keep not only doing this but existing as a brutal apartheid state that they are, which is why we wanted to make this film not just something that you could see and feel bad about, but use it as a tool for action, because that should give us cause for hope. The fact that they suck so much at explaining why they should be able to shoot 40 kids in the head with sniper rifles, they can't say anything. So the Palestinians have put them in a corner. There have been periods of armed struggle in the past in Palestine, of course, which were completely justified. But the Palestinian movement has, by and large, abandoned armed struggle completely, and they've in the West Bank and in Gaza and beyond have adopted this kind of nonviolent protest movement to kind of build international pressure, and it's working. And there's no explanation for the crimes they're continuing to commit. And so that's my takeaway is that Israel is doing worse than I thought, despite it seeming like it's in such a triumphant position now with Trump and its expansion and all of that. They know they're based on continuing to expand, kicking out the entire population, and we think that the more that they accelerate that, the more that they're exposing themselves. And I think that consciousness is changing in a big way, and this is just more evidence of that.
Thank you both so much. All right, it's time to open up for questions from the crowd. Candy's over here with a microphone in the aisle, so please.
Yeah, so my name is Candy Lovisa Ojeda. I am one of the organizers for tonight. One quick announcement I did want to make is one of the sponsoring organizations is Hands Up Venezuela. I'm an organizer for that organization, and we are having a fundraiser this Tuesday. As a formerly undocumented immigrant, I'm a firm believer in the idea that one way to solve the refugee crisis in the United States is to pressure the United States government to stop terrorizing our home countries. For those of you who don't know, it's an estimated 40,000 people have died as a result of U.S. sanctions against Venezuela. So people can't get food, people can't get AIDS treatment, insulin, those types of things. And so the fundraiser on Tuesday is to help raise money so that we could buy medical supplies to ship to Caracas. And Abby and Mike will be there speaking briefly about their experience in Venezuela, because there's been wonderful reporting from the both of them on that topic. So I will be moderating the mic. If you talk too long, I will snatch it away. So please keep your comments to a minimum. Thank you.
Thank you for your film. I wanted to ask you about the New York Times coverage of the protests, which, as you probably know, they stopped covering the protests for most of this year. I don't know when they stopped, but it gave me the illusion that things had kind of faded. But the New York Times consistently, when they did cover the protests, they would have articles which would mention grenade attacks. And this was a continuing trope where people were attacked at the fence with grenades or with guns. And even if it's 99.000% peaceful, are these events complete fabrications or are these anomalies?
Yeah, no, that's never happened at the protests. I mean, there sometimes are armed clashes at the border by militants in Gaza. It's interesting because one of the jobs that Hamas does is patrolling the border to make sure no militants launch attacks against Israel, because they are honoring a ceasefire agreement that happened. And so a lot of these militants, which is of course expected, right? When you do that to the population, there's going to be a militant sector of the population. There's a variety of militant groups in Gaza who believe in armed struggle, and rightfully so, and so do launch attacks against Israeli soldiers. As I said, Hamas, the government in Gaza, tries very hard to prevent those attacks from happening. But of course, anytime you see Israel bombing Gaza, it's because of something like that. It's because one or two guys shot at some Israeli soldiers and then they just bombed a bunch of buildings and killed 20 people or something in retaliation for Hamas attacks, even though Hamas is trying to prevent them. But then those have never happened at the protests. And there's in fact been great discipline by the militants in Gaza, the militant wing of the resistance movement in Gaza, to not interfere with the protests in any way, because they're all in understanding that it would hurt the image of the protest. And so they very explicitly have not done anything like that at all. But of course they will always say that it was because they'll say at the border, so it must have been at the border protest, but no, that's an absolute fabrication.
And also, a lot of times with these articles, they'll just cite Israeli officials. They'll just say that half the article will just be oh, and Israeli officials say this, this, and this, and it's okay, well that means nothing. And they'll just produce random photographs of just guns collected, and you're what is this? This is meaningless propaganda. So that's usually the corporate media's kind of line, is just unequivocally giving the Israeli side carte blanche to explain whatever they do, and there's really no evidence to ever support that I've seen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Israelis film all the they're filming constantly. You saw footage from Israeli soldiers. They're filming everything. So if there ever was an incident of an armed attack at the Great March, you would see the video. That's why they make cartoons. You saw the cartoon of the protesters with the guns. There's a reason they make a cartoon, because they don't actually have any video or photo evidence. But there's videographers and photographers with every single one of those Israeli sniper nets. So that's the evidence that it hasn't happened, is you haven't seen it.
Thank you all for this and all your work and doing things that are unpopular to a lot of people. Thanks for putting yourself out there. My question is kind of about kind of to help myself have these conversations with people who are very anti-BDS movement, kind of where y'all fall in that being a course of action versus things that other politicians such as Bernie Sanders push in terms of conditioning aid and whatnot, where that movement and its effectiveness going forward.
You bring up a good point, which is the Democratic presidential race right now, and how every single Democratic contender is abysmal on this issue. I mean, aside from Bernie Sanders. And let's be clear, though, that Bernie Sanders is not going to liberate Palestine. That's going to come from us. That's going to come from a mass movement mobilizing against all sectors of society, resurrecting a long-lost anti-war movement in this country, and actually pressuring whoever is the president, whether it be Trump, Bernie Sanders, or whoever. Elizabeth Warren, who's certainly not going to bring justice for Palestine by herself. But I mean, let's be clear, is that Bernie Sanders does have the best position on Palestine, which is he has actually articulated what the two-state solution would be in his eyes, which is withdrawing settlements to the pre-1967 borders. If you remember in the film, that's actually what Hamas's charter says today. They are willing to negotiate that as well. Bernie Sanders, as of course the only Jewish contender, which would be historical in itself, is also saying that he would withhold military aid, and he's using that as leverage. No other candidate has even gone close. They speak out of both sides of their mouth. They just say two-state solution, blah, blah, blah. Look, we're talking about a one-state solution here. We know that that's the only way. There is no second state to be had. The settlements have atomized the entire West Bank, and that's what we're told by the international community. That's the second Palestinian state. That's been dead since the Oslo Accords. Israeli government officials laughed at that notion. As you saw, the last election was basically between Trump and Trump-esque figures, and they openly are talking about annexing the entire West Bank, and they kind of laugh off the notion that there could ever be a Palestinian state. So it's just cartoonish that our politicians are still actually talking about this, and having this rhetoric. I mean, it's insulting, actually, to anyone who understands the situation. But yeah, I think Bernie Sanders is the best hope to respond to a mass movement. But he certainly is not going to bring justice for Palestine. He's certainly not going to bring the end to apartheid. Just like South Africa, I mean, apartheid will fall once there is a complete isolation, a cultural boycott, academic boycott, and just complete embarrassment for anyone who chooses to align with what's going on. And that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. That's what's happening already. I think that really incredible things are going on. This might seem trivial, but someone like Demi Lovato was just paid $150,000 to do some ridiculous PR tour in Israel. She actually had to apologize after coming back because she said, I didn't realize the situation. So she was basically given $150,000 and then had to retract even going and saying, oh my God, I didn't realize it, I'm so sorry. We had Lana Del Rey and all these other artists dropping like flies at the Meteor Festival in Tel Aviv. It is becoming taboo for people who actually have no idea even what's going on, and they sign on to these concerts and they sign on to these conferences, and then they basically are just isolated from their own fans. And you just see, this multi-million-dollar Hasbro propaganda machine that Mike was referring to, it's not working anymore. There's no traction. You go online, there's no propaganda movement on behalf of the Palestinians. They don't have multi-million-dollar apparatus to control the narrative like Israel does. But the comments, the feedback, 10-to-1 pro-Palestine, we're not buying it anymore. We see the reality with our own eyes. And that is an incredible thing. The fact that there are a couple sitting congresswomen who are unequivocally pro-BDS is a positive move, right? And it's definitely terrifying the Republican establishment and Trump. But I think that all of these things, as small as they may seem, really do signify a shift. A shift is happening. You see it represented in polls of both Democratic and Republican alike. But they are running scared. The Israeli government is running scared, and so is our government. The bipartisan agenda of kind of this unabashed pro-Israel position. 26 states have already preemptively passed anti-BDS resolutions. 26 states. I was just affected by this. As an independent contractor who was slated to speak at the University of Georgia, I was sent the contract and it said, you cannot boycott Israel if you want to speak here. This has happened to speech pathologists, this is happening to hurricane relief disaster workers, which really shows you the power of BDS. And going back to your question, BDS is really the only thing that we can do and that we have to do. We cannot depend on politicians. There is going to be no savior in 2020 and no hope from the top, because even if Bernie Sanders wins, nothing will happen without us generating the movement in the masses in the streets, shutting it down, and demanding justice for Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. I mean, that no president is going to wave a magic wand, and there needs to be social pressure from below, which is true of any progressive change in society. On the same note, though, if you do care about Palestinian rights and you are a registered Democratic voter, there's no one else you can vote for except Bernie Sanders without betraying the Palestinian cause. Of course, we have differences with Bernie on many foreign policy issues and some of his position on Palestine in general, but you can still care about Palestinian rights and vote for Bernie Sanders and you're not betraying Palestine. But any of the other candidates is a true betrayal. But I will say that other factor that there's of course a great opportunity with Bernie Sanders in the primary, and a Bernie Sanders presidency would provide a great opportunity for the movement for Palestine because of what he has promised he would do, and of course his record of responding to actual social movements, as other presidents never do, and we haven't had one in I think maybe ever in a long time, who would respond to social movements. But I think that what we need to keep in mind is that the event that he does get screwed out of the nomination, we shouldn't give up on it. I mean, of course, it provides a great opportunity, but we can still win on this issue in another Trump term. There can be a free Palestine, there can be a solution that Palestinian people agree to, even in Trump's second term. It all depends on the strength of the international movement that forces that to happen, that forces the UN to bring Israel before courts, that cuts off Israel's line of communication and money and all that stuff from the United States. Like, in particular, the great work that was mentioned at the beginning of this, of like cutting off all these corporations from Israel. I mean, those are things that can happen no matter who is the president, and that we have to continue to do no matter who's the president. And about the tactics that are used, I mean, the tactics that we're using are what is being asked by the Palestinian people. They have told us very loudly, do the BDS movement everywhere in the world that you can. And so that's why we're doing that. They've said, come out into the streets. Every time we need you to come out in the streets. Whenever we're under attack, whenever we're out in the streets, we need you to be out there too. Share the truth. Share the media that makes sense, like this film, which you can see on GazaFightsForFreedom.com. Share it with your friends. That's what they have asked us to do, and so that's why we're on that path.
Because we can't stop talking, let's take a lump of questions and then we can answer about 3 at once if y'all don't mind.
I'm Betty Shepherd, and I'm with the Jewish Force for Peace, in our chapter in Portland and also nationally. And we recently hosted a doctor, an orthopedic doctor who had come back from Gaza for the second time, Dr. Clyde Ferris. He was working with the Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. We have a chapter in Oregon as well. And he was over there to help so many of the children that are killed or shot are maimed rather than killed. And they do that on purpose. The LMS scopes help them to aim very well. And they use bullets, as you showed here, that explode. I wanted to know who makes those bullets. Dr. Ferris didn't know. And they are really, really, brutal. And that's one company that ought to be boycotted, speaking of boycott.
They're called butterfly bullets.
Butterfly bullets. Are they made by any one company, or is it?
Israel's
is now one of the largest weapons contractors in the world.
Yes.
And so they could very well be making them themselves. But I advocate boycotting all weapons contractors.
Yes, absolutely, especially the top five.
But no, that's definitely, thank
Yeah.
you very much, and thank you
Yeah.
for your work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hi, following up with that, the boycott movement, the boycott movement, is all well and good and everything, and the manufacturers of these weapons, but until the US stops giving them billions every day, they will keep making these things. This documentary, by the way, I'm so glad that I got to come today, thank you. How do you get this? How do you share it where it needs to be seen on campuses when you've got people calling names like this is, what is it, anti-Semitic or stuff like that? I mean, this, how is it possible that we can't even go to a media and you can't demand them to show, but like say, we've done this, we want you to put it on the air. What processes can be done to get, channels like here we've got channel 2, 6, 8, whatever. How can it be done to get this on the air? Not just radio like PBS or OPB, or NPR. What measures are possible? Like the Nazi era, they controlled stuff, and I wonder how we can
Thank you.
expose this.
Thank you.
One more thing, quick.
I think that we're running out of time, sorry, we're gonna get kicked out of here. We're gonna get kicked out of here.
Gaza there's no time.
I know, they're out of water.
Thanks for the work. Real quick questions. The Bill Maher clip, was that Barry Weiss?
Yes, she's a disgusting person.
Yes, thank you. One thing I would have added with the title saying this anyway. What's been of all these showings that you've had of this, what has been your favorite reaction?
Probably to the media montage of, literally people, have you ever heard in the history of humanity actually accusing people of committing self-genocide? It's really fascinating, right? That they've cultivated this narrative that they can actually say it's your fault that you don't have water. It's your fault you don't have electricity. It's your fault we're killing you. Right? It's your fault that you're dying, you're committing self-genocide. So I enjoyed putting those clips together because it shows how absurd this kind of slick PR machine is and how outrageous the propaganda really is when you put it together in that way. To answer the woman's question who just spoke, yeah, we've reached out to streaming services. It's a third rail issue, we know that. This is why it's not being covered in the corporate media. We cannot get it out other than grassroots methods. That's why we're working with organizations like DSA. That's why we're working with organizations like JVP, because we have to mobilize grassroots networks to build this movement peer-to-peer. It's never going to be done from establishment media networks. All we can do is really reach out to our public access and public radio networks to get interviews about this, to get it seen. We're working with Means TV, they're an anti-capitalist burgeoning network that's going to be launching in January to potentially stream this for free on there. And again, just GazaFightsForFreedom.com. After this tour, we're going to make it more widely available for everyone.
Yeah, PBS Frontline, have you ever watched Frontline documentaries? They actually made a documentary about the Great March of Return, and it was going to air on PBS. And it got yanked from the programming. So it's not going to get on, even PBS is not going to show it, let alone any of the other ones. So that's why we're doing it in a grassroots way. As Abby said, we're part of this tour is not just to get, we're doing it grassroots, getting the film as widely as we can see, as can be seen in communities. But also to raise money to get it seen in more places, to get it out at more places, get it out for free places, things like that. So everyone got a leaflet with how you can support us. We're selling t-shirts outside. All of that money for the t-shirts, the posters, stickers, everything goes to both recouping the cost of this film and allowing us to continue to get this film out there, to continue to produce Empire Files work. Just a little sampling of this was not a low-budget film. This was not on a grassroots budget, even though we had a grassroots budget. It was all donations that paid for this, but we raised about half the money we needed to produce it. For example, all that black and white archival footage that you saw, really awesome historical footage, that's all owned by major news corporations, and you have to pay to license it. That black and white footage cost $50 per second to license to show you. So just do the math, but it was like a 5-minute scene. So that's the kind of stuff, of course, paying the journalists in Gaza, which was the most of our budget, was paying them Hollywood wages, not Gaza wages. So that's kind of the other purpose of doing the fundraising that we've been doing. Because our goal is to get this seen as much as possible, and we're doing it in that grassroots way.
And on GazaFightsForFreedom.com, we have a direct contact form if anyone's interested in sharing it and spreading it across college campuses. We're always down to do that. We'll take 2 more questions, and then we're going to be outside to answer more and at the next table. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question. Thank you for the wonderful movie. The first question is, did you check the school books in the West Bank and in Gaza, and are they the same for the children? And the second question, did you check the Israeli school books? Are they sort of countrywide the same?
Okay, next question.
Yeah, we'll actually both at the same time.
Good afternoon. I have a couple questions. Thank you so much for the film. It was wonderful. I mean, it was sad, but wonderful. Thank you. I'm leaving on Friday, going to the Middle East, and I will be flying into Tel Aviv, and then I want to go from Tel Aviv over to Jordan. And my understanding is very difficult to leave Israel, and I want to know why. And then I'll fly from Jordan over to Cairo and then come home from Cairo. So my question to you, why is it so difficult to go from Israel to Jordan? And what bridge or what crossing is the most safe place to go?
We can definitely speak to you afterwards and tell you how to. It's more difficult to get into Israel. So that's going to be your problem. Is not getting out. They'll be happy to get you out. Their problem is getting in.
Someone said that they had to spend $200 US dollars to leave Israel.
They will be happy to kick you out. They might detain you for a while before they kick you out, but they will be happy to get you out. It's very difficult to get in, and I'd be happy to talk to you after our table, because I do want to talk to you, because there are very important things for you to do to not get detained and deported back to the United States. They will not let you in for any kind of small infraction. So I would love to talk to you afterwards
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank
to
you
let
so
you know that.
much.
Yeah, no problem. Did you yeah, no, I mean, we did. Of course, there's a dramatically different lives for people living in 48, what's called Israel, and people living in Palestine. I'm not sure that what you were getting at the question, but I would be happy to talk to you afterwards to clarify.
Yeah, I would actually look into the work of Jana Jihad, who's the youngest passport-holding, card-carrying journalist in the world, who's Palestinian. And she speaks a lot about what it's like for to have a childhood in Palestine. She lives in the West Bank. Well, that concludes our time for tonight. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Abby and Mike, for being here. Hope to see you all at Cyber Riot.